Hello, my name is Asia Gosnell, and this is my Aging and Development interview presentation. The first person that I interviewed was Danielle Martineau Bell. She was born in Fairborn, Ohio, and her birthday is June 5th, 1963. Her primary language is English, and her cultural affiliation is the Chamorro culture. I found this very interesting because although she was born in Ohio and lived there till 11, she moved to Guam at 11 and lived there for 5 years. She still considers that her cultural affiliation. She's moved back and forth throughout her life, and she's currently living on Guam. And she said that although she's lived in many places, the friends that she's made and the people that she has met from there have always been generous and kind to her. She has 5 siblings, and she moved out at the age of 19. The reason for that was because she went to college. She went to attend Chaminade University. It was interesting to find out that Danielle had dated her husband for 2 months before getting engaged. I was very surprised that they had only dated for a short amount of period and were ready to get married after knowing each other for only 2 months. She explained very simply, "I knew that he was the one from the moment I met him." They were together for 24 years, and Danielle had her first child, Nicholas Ross Bell, at the age of 30. When asked how did this change her dynamic with her husband and what emotions or feelings did they have when Nick arrived, she said that they were both excited and that her husband was ready to start a family. But for her, her feelings were a bit different because she mentioned that she was scared and anxious. She used the word daunting several times to describe the first few months, but after the first year, she got used to caring for her child, and those emotions and fears subsided. Throughout her life, she had small jobs through high school and college. When she moved back to Guam after college, she worked for her parents and she had a very flexible schedule. After having Nick, she wasn't able to get up and travel, but it wasn't until the age of 14 that she decided to go work part-time. When asked why, she said that she felt like those years were very crucial for a child and that she wanted to make sure that Nick knew that she was there for him. June 2nd, 2016 is the day that Danielle's fairy tale life seemed to have come to a screeching stop. That was the day that her husband Eric was hit by a car during his morning bicycle ride. 15 days later, he passed away from his injuries. I asked her what emotions she felt because of the accident and how did it feel to be widowed at the age of 53. Danielle used the word devastating many times, and that devastating was not even a strong enough word to describe what she was feeling. The second person that I interviewed is Pasita Maring Avalera. Her birthplace is Candihay, Bohol in the Philippines, and her birthday is October 28, 1930. Her primary language is Visayan, and her cultural affiliation is the Filipino culture. She was orphaned a few months after birth, and she was raised by her uncle. She had one sister, Miguela, who was 5 years older than her. She moved out at the age of 22 to go to Manila to seek work and a higher education. She wanted to become a nurse, but because she did not have the funds for her education, she decided to go to school to be a teacher. At the age of 27, she married her husband Pedro Abalera after dating for 2 years. They went on to have 6 kids together, 5 girls and 1 boy. A few months after getting married, Pasita found out she was pregnant. When asked how she felt when she found out, she said that her and Pedro were excited to start a family. They were overwhelmed and happy. She said that she wasn't very nervous because growing up she would take care of her cousin and her sister's children. For much of her children's life, their father was not around. He was a surveyor and would travel around the province surveying land and would send money back to them. Because of this, Pasita had to work full-time as a housekeeper until she graduated. After completing her studies at the university, she went on to teach at a local school, even though she had 4 kids by then. Her youngest was 4 months when she started to teach. Her Miguela's older daughters would watch her children while she was at school. This helped her out tremendously and allowed her to continue working. On December 16, 2006, Pasita's husband passed away suddenly from an aneurysm. She said that she felt completely alone because he was the person that she would come home to every day. Daniel and Pasita are very different people. Both of them experienced many of the same life events. A few of the life events that were experienced alike are social roles in young adulthood, such as leaving the house, getting married, and having children. Social roles in middle adulthood, such as having the children grow up and leave. the loss of loved ones, and finding their spirituality. Although they had similarities, they had differences as well because of their age. Danielle, at the age of 54, is feeling the pressures of trying to look young as well as having a stepson. Pasita, at the age of 87, is older and cannot live on her own. We discuss social roles in midlife, such as becoming a parent, and social roles in late adulthood, such as becoming the care receiver. After graduating high school at 17, Danielle moved back to Guam and lived with her parents for a year until she decided that she wanted to go to college. Her dream college was Sophia University in Tokyo, Japan, but her father told her that she needed to prove that she was serious about that kind of commitment before she could spend that kind of money on education. So she attended Chaminade University in Oahu, Hawaii, at the age of 18. Her dreams of Sophia slowly faded away as she fell in love with Hawaii. She described it as exciting and loved the experience of moving out of her parents' house and experiencing life on her own. Danielle's parents paid for her college education expenses during those years. But at the age of 22, she moved back to Guam and worked full-time for her parents. She was able to fully support herself after a few months of moving back to Guam and did not rely on her parents financially after that. The book mentioned that the proportion of people who marry are decreasing and the age at marriage is increasing. This can be seen in Danielle's life. She dated her husband for 2 months and married him at 27. They did not cohabitate before this marriage, mainly because they were together for a short amount of time. Different from the book, the main reason why Danielle married later in life is because she chose to pursue a professional career and expand her parents' jewelry and clothing business. During this time, she traveled through Asia and Europe quite often. The constant traveling did not leave her with much time for a social life. In fact, she met her husband Eric a few days before she left for a trip, and they had their first date 2 weeks later when she got back from that same trip. During her marriage, her and Eric shared equal roles, such as she did the cooking and cleaning while he did the yard work and house repairs. Danielle became a parent at the age of 30. She mentioned that there was no decline in marital happiness as mentioned in the book. In fact, as the years went on, they grew to love and respect each other even more. In Pasita's second year in college, she decided to move out of her uncle's house at the age of 22 to pursue her education in the University of Manila. Unlike Danielle, she had to pay for her college tuition. Pasita had to work as a housemaid to cover her costs. At first, she wanted to become a nurse because she loved helping others, but that degree was too costly for her, so she chose to go into education. During her time in Manila, she met her husband Pedro, and they dated for 2 years before getting married. The book mentions that cohabitation is normal for those who date, and that normally leads to a later age at which they get married. But Pasita's relationship with Pedro was different. They were both devout Catholic, and because of that, they did not cohabitate before marriage. Pasita married Pedro at the age of 27, but she married him at a later age because, like Danielle, she was trying to finish her schooling so that she may have a professional life. But things did not go according to plan, and she became pregnant a few months after they got married. This put a stop to her education for a while. It wasn't until she had her 4th child that she was able to graduate as a teacher and teach at a local school. The book mentions that couples normally have shared roles in the relationship, like in Danielle's and Eric's relationship. But Pasita's relationship with her husband was different because he wasn't home very often. His job had him moving around constantly, and because of this, Pasita had to take on both roles, such as doing the housework, yard work, and whatever else came her way, while raising her children by herself. Social roles in middle adulthood. Danielle's children both moved out at the same time. Her biological son, Nick, moved out at the age of 18, while her stepson, George, moved out at the age of 21. The book describes this as a second honeymoon because parents have more time for each other. When asked about this time, Danielle stated that she was excited for her children. She wanted them to be able to experience life like she had when she'd first moved out of her parents' house. Although both kids moved out, they spent a lot of time together as a family. Her sons would come and visit every Sunday, and they would barbecue or cook. Pasita's children moved out at different times because of the 9-year gap between her eldest, Helen, and her youngest, Esper. Each child seemed to move out around the age of 20 to 24, depending on if they had a significant other or could support themselves. Although the book calls this the second honeymoon, Pasita did not feel the same. She said that she felt very lonely having all of her children move out of the house. She was excited for them but wished that they were there as well. Pasita has 13 grandchildren that she helped raise. Her and her husband played an active role in each of their upbringing. It is a tradition in her family that the grandmother washes each newborn baby for a year. Much like the book mentioned, she had a grandchild room in her house while her grandchildren were growing up. It was filled with toys, books, the TV, and a bed for napping. She also helped with dropping them off to school and picking them up from school, school projects, cooking dinner, and becoming a chaperone on several field trips, as well as several friends who've passed away throughout the years. When I asked her how she felt about all of these deaths, she said that she just felt sad. She never mentioned anger once. I asked her to compare the different levels of relationship with each person who died, and she mentioned that her son and grandchild passing away felt like the same kind of grief, because in a way, a grandchild is a child, but nothing compared to her husband's passing. She explained that to her that was the hardest to cope with because he was her rock and her everything. He was a person that she came home to every day for 56 years. Death and bereavement. The loss of Daniel's husband was a non-normative event. They were both healthy individuals who were in their 50s. On June 2nd, 2016, Eric got up to do his early morning bicycle ride just as he did every morning. But this morning was different. He was hit by a car and died 15 days later from his injuries. The book mentions the 5 stages of death by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. When asked about how she felt about the death of her husband at a relatively young age, all that Danielle could say was devastating. She said that for a long time, and even sometimes now, she gets angry. Not at the situation or at the man that took her husband away from her, but at the fact that her sons will never be able to experience life events with their father, like them getting married or having children. She says that she feels like their time with him was taken and that it wasn't fair because Eric was a good man to the community and to her family. Pasita has experienced death constantly throughout her life, starting with both of her parents passing away while she was an infant, her son in 1982, her sister in 1994, her husband in 2006, and her grandchild in 2010. The book mentions that cultural stereotypes allow for only one mother per child, and that a stepmother must be careful to not intrude in the special relationship that the child has with his or her real mother. Stepmothers are considered as mothering, but not as a mother, other-focused, or an outsider. But this is not true with Danielle and her stepson George. When asked how many children she had, she proudly explained 2, with no hesitation or explanation. I asked her how does she look at George, even though he isn't her biological son. And she implied, he is my son, and I am his mother. They have had their ups and downs, but just like any other relationship, but in her eyes, he is her son. Spirituality. The book mentions that as an individual gets older, they still practice their faith in spirituality, but are less likely to go to church. This can be seen in Danielle's life. Growing up, Danielle would go to church each week with her family, but she believed that spirituality is within. Spirituality has nothing to do with going to church each week. She feels the most spiritual when she has her one-on-one time with God. She really started searching when her husband died because she wanted to try and understand why he died and why this happened to her. For Pasita, The book mentioned that spirituality increases with age. When asked if she believed that, she agreed. She mentioned that throughout her life, she experienced many scenarios where she was just lucky. But looking back at those scenarios now in her later life, she realized that she wasn't lucky and that it was God's hand that kept her safe and delivered her through it. Throughout her life, she has been a devout Catholic, but it wasn't until recently that she started to really analyze the hardships that she'd been in and that it wasn't through her alone that she survived them. A few questions that I asked Pesita because of her age. The book mentions that a new challenge that older women have to learn to cope with is living alone because of a spouse's death. Pesita experienced this in 2006 when her husband passed away. But she never really felt lonely. Many of her grandchildren would visit often, and two of her daughters lived right next to her on the same street. A few years later, Pesita moved in with Esper because she was too old to live alone at the age of 83. There are a number of advantages when living with a family member compared to a caregiver. It allows family members to become closer, and it is also cheaper than hiring someone. Pesita did not like the idea at first because she felt as though her freedom had been taken away, but she has grown to like living with her daughter again. She felt as though it was an inconvenience to Esper since she can't drive anymore. Pesita still gets frustrated with having to wait whenever she wants to go somewhere. She misses the freedom of getting up and driving somewhere whenever she wanted to. Although daunting at first, this project has taught me so much. It was interesting to see two people from different times experience the same life events. I think the most amazing thing I saw when interviewing Danielle and Pesita was how each was empowered in their own way. They experienced so much adversity in their life, yet they survived it and it made them stronger. I like listening to Danielle's love story and her advice on what to find in a spouse, and how a mutual respect for each other can go a long way. This project was very educational to me, and I enjoyed hearing both of these women's oral histories.